Let's go to Marusha Kadama again in Brussels, who's Secretary General of the SLOCAT Partnership, for our final panel of today. Marusha.
Thank you very much, Nick. Fascinating conversations you were having there that show all the complexity of the choices ahead of us, indeed. So why are we talking cities? Why are we talking mobility in cities in this closing panel of the day? Well, urban mobility accounts for 40% of all the CO2 emissions of road transport and up to 70% of all the other pollutants from transport. Cities consume 2/3 of the world energy. At the same time, they're at risk of some of the biggest impacts of climate change, whether it is rising sea levels or coastal storms. But at the same time, we know that cities are places of socio-economic opportunity. And we know that they generate 80% of the global GDP. And that is quite something, isn't it? And as Nick was telling us, 60% of people are already living in cities, and apparently more to be living in cities in the next decades, according to what is being projected by different international entities. So how are we going to go about mobility in cities and making the right choices and supporting the right decisions for the mobility of the future? That must be one that is sustainable and low carbon. We have a wonderful panel with a lot of experience of what it takes to make very tough decisions, ones that sometimes require trade-offs. Let me introduce them to you with no further ado. We have with us the mayor of Helsinki, Jan Vapuri. Also with us, we've got Gregor Robertson, who is the global ambassador for the Global Covenant of Mayors and former mayor of Vancouver himself. And last but not least, we have with us Karin Hertzberg from the city of Oslo, where she is the special advisor for international climate cooperation. So, panel, let me take it to you in the interest of time, because there's a lot I know that could be discussed and could be teased out in all of these. But in your experience in your cities, currently or in the past, what is that one breakthrough? What is that one action you would like to see in your city in order to take mobility to be transformed, to be that is both accessible and that is also one that takes care of climate change? Over to you. Let's start perhaps with the mayor. Jan, please.
Thank you very much for a question which I actually don't like that much, because I used to say everywhere and all the time and always that especially the case of tackling the climate change needs a really comprehensive approach and a holistic view. The city of Helsinki is really strongly committed to become carbon neutral by 2035. And in order to make that happen, we have an action plan consisting of 147 single action points. And we are so convinced that you need to make them all happen. You need to take care of all of those 147 action points in order to make what you have promised your people, your residents, and the rest of the world. So a comprehensive approach, a holistic view, a understanding that everything counts, everything impacts everything, and at the same time in the world, which is changing a lot all the time. But then if I still need to say one single thing, I think that it's important to pay attention and put emphasis on urban planning. So I think the most efficient way to reduce emissions from the transport and mobility is actually not to reduce transport and traffic itself, but to reduce the need for transport and traffic. So plan a city in a way where people naturally, actually without even thinking about it, walk as much as possible, cycle as much as possible, and when they need to travel from point A to point B, that they are so close to each other as possible.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mayor. Gregor, let's go to you. I mean, you sit in that privileged, I think, viewpoint where you can see what many different cities across the globe are doing. Now, yourself, you have experience of what it means to have public office, isn't it? So what do you think cities should be doing to shift towards the low carbon mobility that we need?
Well, there is a toolkit, and as the mayor said, that isn't just transportation, but planning is a huge part of it. Making sure we have livable, workable communities where people can walk and bike easily to everything that they need. Ultimately, we have to have options, whether it's car sharing, which has been very successful in Vancouver, or it's using zero emission vehicles. And I work with the Pacific Coast Collaborative here, the cities and states and province on the west coast of North America. Zero emission vehicles are an important part of our future because of the distances. And frankly, companies like Tesla who are making it possible to get around good infrastructure that we are building on the public side that is zero emission and charging.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. So a few things are emerging there. Clearly, that importance of planning for people, planning for proximity, different options, different modes. Karin, what do you have to tell us from the experience of Oslo? What do you think that cities should be doing to go towards this transformation of our mobility?
First of all, thank you for having Oslo included in the panel. It's a great honor to engage in this conversation. A bit like Helsinki, Oslo has very high ambitions on climate change, with a target of reducing emissions by 95% by 2030, as well as making the city more climate resilient. And this really means that we have to integrate climate action everywhere, into all the agencies, making everyone responsible for taking action to meet that overall target. So we have a number of action areas, and transportation is obviously one of them. But I think it is the key point that achieving that climate target, doing that transformation of the city of Oslo, is a shared responsibility across all departments. When it comes to transportation, I very much agree with what's just been said about the importance of planning, about taking the city back. And that's really what we're working on in Oslo, to speed up the process of taking the city back to its inhabitants. So city development has sort of been giving first access or privilege in a way to car transport, and we want to give the streets and the city environment back to the inhabitants. That means changing planning, changing infrastructure, opening up areas that have been dominated by cars and transport to cycling, as well as a huge effort on electrification. So those remaining vehicles and transports, including for freight, that we still need to have there. Thanks.
Excellent. So a huge combination of efforts, shared responsibility very clearly at the center. Thank you very much to the of you. I think you've already teased out very important notions here. Planning for people, planning for walking and cycling, public transport at the center, electrification, shared responsibility. Wonderful. You're already exciting the brains of our participants, and I see that questions are already coming up. So because we have very little time, and we have a lot of participants from around the globe sparing their time to join us, I'm going to go straight into those questions and see how we can try to address them. They are not addressed to any of you in particular, so feel free to jump up. Let's be dynamic. Let's keep it lively. So, first question to mayors. How can city-to-city transport be primarily train travel and water transport? Also, can we force next day delivery be a premium product and not a standard? Is there something that we can do about that? Let's start with those two questions. Let's see who, you can pick any of the two. No need to respond to the three of them. Who would like to start? Don't be shy. Greg,
well, the first
perhaps?
part was the question was about was using the water for transport. Is that what the first question part of that was?
Exactly. What about train travel and water transport? Is it something worth looking into when you're in a public office? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big challenge that we have faced, many cities, I think, around the world face, is not being in control of utilities, or not in control of train travel outside of the city, obviously, or not being in control of the waterways. So that there's jurisdiction problems and challenges for many cities trying to make these changes, but we don't have cooperation from other governments or utilities. That can make it more challenging. That said, I think there's a lot of leadership in cities. I think Oslo and Helsinki have both been leading cities around the world. But cities like ours in the north, I think we have been able to make progress. We have to always be thinking of cities in the global south and the challenges they face, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of jurisdiction and resources. So a lot of efforts have to be made as the urbanization in the global south and the transportation challenges in particular, the cities grow and sprawl, are going to need a lot more support from the north and governments around the world.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. The notion that a city goes beyond its administrative boundaries, isn't it? And that we probably need different levels of government to work together in a cohesive manner to support urban mobility. Who else would like to take this question about, what can we do to foster train travel, water travel? If any of our two other speakers would like to talk about this, whether it is the mayor or Karim.
I can share.
Please.
Thanks. So Oslo is by the fjord, so we do have a lot of water transport. We do have regular ferries and so on. They are part of the transport system, and by the end of this year, all of the regular ferries, passenger boats, really, the North Office, will be electric in Oslo. And that reduces our transport emissions, obviously. It's also part of a national drive to move towards green shipping. Electric ferries is being introduced in several parts of Norway, and it's sort of a combination of public policy, ambitious climate policies, and the shipping industry. Our sort of main tool to drive some of these changes is to use the power that we have as authorities in setting requirements in public procurement. And I think that sort of public procurement sounds not sort of the big hot topic, but it's a very efficient tool, and we're using that as much as we can. We're expanding that tool to set requirements not just for transportation, also for construction machinery, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. The strength of public procurement for transformation and for also supporting technologies that perhaps struggle to penetrate the market, isn't it? Mayor, anything you would like to add to this first question, please?
I don't know whether I have that much to add. I think it's just important to understand that cities are places where you have hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of people, and they have different kind of lives, they have different kind of needs, they have different kind of wishes. Some of them love to be outdoors, especially I know in Norway. I mean, people just love to go out and make different kind of outdoor activities. Then we have climate issues, like in all of our cities, that we may have quite harsh winters, which make some challenges as far as cycling are concerned, and so on. And that circumstances differ from place to place that much. And there is no solutions which would work for everyone. And you need always to be creative and have different kind of opportunities and possibilities and actions for different kind of people, and at the same time to try to take the big boat in a direction which is a little bit more sustainable all the time.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Karin, let me go back to the notion of electrification, because you're actually showing us by the example of Oslo that electrification is not about just electrifying the car that we drive, that there's the potential of electrifying different modes. Of course, we also know that perhaps not all the cities in the globe can tap into the same natural resources that you can do in Norway. But what would be some reflection, some tips that you would offer to all the cities in the world who would like to embark in this adventure of electrification?
So the electrification of transport in Oslo is also very closely aligned with, or it's building on national level policies. There are some strong economic incentives to national policies which makes it cheaper to buy an electric car than a fossil fuel car, for instance, and some exemptions for toll roads and so on and so forth. So that's sort of driving a large uptake of electric vehicles in Norway as such, and therefore also in Oslo. But we are making a huge effort in Oslo in rolling out the infrastructure, in putting in place charging points, and the city is doing some of that, and we're also engaging in cooperation with businesses that really want to make a business of putting up fast chargers. And that's a key issue for future owners of electric cars. Another important side of that, I think, is that both for the city of Oslo, but also nationally, but definitely for the city of Oslo, people sort of see that climate policy is just going to be tightened. We are now working on, we've started planning to introduce zero emission zones in the city of Oslo. So this is at the planning stage, but it was launched, or it was signaled in the budget that was put forward about a month ago. And a zero emission zone would actually require zero emission vehicles. So if you live in Oslo and you're planning to buy a car, you would sort of, thinking about the future, you would move in that direction. But it doesn't work on its own. It's sort of a combination of measures that's needed.
Excellent. So that national framework, that infrastructure, wonderful. Mayor, let me ask you something. We know that you have recently launched the Helsinki Energy Challenge competition. I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of lessons there that can be drawn, isn't it, for the transport sector as well. Could you like to share with us a few of those? What could be transposed from what you're learning through that Energy Challenge competition, please?
The Helsinki Energy Challenge is about how to get rid of coal in heating the city, which is actually the biggest challenge for us as from a climate point of view. And we decided, and actually we have even a legally binding act from the government in Finland that the coal will be forbidden as an energy source by 2029. And now we face a problem that we need to replace coal with something in a quite short period of time, and we did not actually know how to do that. We could have followed some of other cities in Northern Europe and replace coal by biomass, but we don't think that that will be a sustainable solution in the long run. So what we did was that we launched a Helsinki Energy Challenge competition, a competition with the first prize of €1 million, and asked the rest of the world to solve our problem. Asked the whole world to come with ideas how to replace coal in the heating system of Helsinki. And now we got something like 252 applications, and I'm sure that some of them will help our forward. But what is, I think, even more valuable is that I'm sure that we're going to have tens or even hundreds of ideas which we can't maybe utilize in Helsinki, but can help other cities all around the world. And that's why I think that because cities are different, but at the same time they have similar kind of problems and challenges. And that's why like those kind of open competitions where we partnered, for example, this time not with the city of Vancouver, but with the city of Toronto, and together ask the world to help us to solve something is something which we can scale up, which we can copy more or less in several cities all around the world. And that is maybe the biggest learning. We have not revealed the winner yet. We don't know how brilliant the idea will be, but we know that we have tens of good ideas which can benefit several cities all around the world. And I think that this goes for transport as well. I mean, you just need to identify a challenge and then open up a competition.
Exactly. So the notion of social innovation that is behind it as well, isn't it? And it's wonderful how you can reconcile both the energy sector needs and challenges with the transport challenges and opportunities as well. That is really terrific. There's a question that is coming up there, and I think it's a very interesting one. I'm going to address it to the mayors and the former mayor because it's addressed to both of you. In your role as mayor, what was the toughest climate decision you had to make and why? If we could perhaps link it to mobility, that would be wonderful because we are discussing mobility, isn't it? But let me perhaps start with Gregor, just to give the mayor a bit of a break. So when you were in Vancouver as a mayor there, what was that toughest climate decision and why?
I would say, I mean, the toughest challenges we faced were, frankly, dealing with our federal government. We had we had a government that was sort of diametrically opposed to our cities in Canada. So the mayors, we were not getting along with the national government, who were very focused on fossil fuel development. Many of my years in office, so we had our own challenges implementing bike lanes. Shifting the use of transportation over to walking and biking as a priority, and investing in public transport. Um, but I think people realized those were the right things to do. It wasn't always easy politically, but the biggest challenge we faced was dealing with a national government that would not support us, and in fact was building fossil fuel infrastructure, forcing that on cities, which is taking us the wrong direction. And so I think we faced that up and down the west coast of North America, and despite that, we have this collaboration on the west coast. The state of California has been a great leader on zero emissions, on emissions for vehicles. From Oregon and Washington and BC, those provinces and states have all been good leaders too, with carbon taxes, with zero emission transportation. So I think at a regional level, there's been a lot of work together. At a national level, particularly when you have a President Trump, or you have a Minister Harper, governments that are very difficult to work with as cities, it makes life much more difficult.
Insightful. What else, Mayor?
I think that my administration's toughest decision was not linked to mobility, it was linked to buildings. You know that buildings, they stand for something like 40% of all energy used in the world, and also as far as emissions are concerned. And I mean, even if we are a capital of a EU member state, having EU regulations with quite strict building codes as far as new buildings are concerned, we decided to come with even stricter building codes in order to really get forward. And that was a quite tough decision due to the fact that most of the business society was not that pleased with that kind of regulation. And especially in circumstances which we actually have quite similar in Oslo and Vancouver, with a quite cold climate. I mean, building and isolating buildings in a way which guarantees healthy indoor quality at the same time when they are net zero or even plus energy houses is not an easy task, but I think it's just a necessity, and that's why we wanted to move faster than the government and the EU wanted or forced us to do, and that was a tough one.
Excellent. I see there's more questions coming in, and let me try to mix it with another notion that I think be addressing, really to try to maximize, the opportunity of listening to your experience. We know that the pandemic has brought about a lot of changes in mobility in our cities. We know, of course, that it has shown us to what extent socioeconomic opportunity depends as well on access to mobility, or good freight transportation, isn't it, to make sure that supplies are guaranteed. We have also seen that behavioral change can occur at much faster paces than what we thought it could be possible in terms of mobility modes. So let's try to combine these ideas together and give me a bit more, if you don't mind, about what are the lessons you think that we have learned in this, we are still learning in this pandemic, about bringing people along to transform mobility and to understand that intersection between mobility and equity, mobility and social justice, and also climate action. So what are the lessons learned, you think, that we should be reflecting about and taking for the future? Let me start with Karine, perhaps, and then I will go to Gregor, and I will then hand it to the mayor. Karine, please.
Yeah, one of the good things about the pandemic and the corona crisis is actually related to transportation. And the mayor of Helsinki mentioned that Norwegians are very fond of being outdoors. I think that's also made it easier to explain that we've had this incredible increase in people cycling in Oslo. So there's been about a 40% increase was shown in August, September, and I think around about the same level in October as well. And mind you, October has been very wet in Oslo. And that change in cycling in Oslo has sort of created a culture shift, I think, when it comes to cycling, from being a few cyclists to being dominating sort of the traffic situation in parts of the city. It hasn't come on its own. There has been several years now where the network of bike lanes has been rapidly expanding in Oslo. So it is much easier and safer to cycle in Oslo than before. But it's shown a great change in the attitude towards cycling, both in those who repair and fix bikes and so on. And most recently, there was this poll where people were asked if they missed their commute to work, and when we were in lockdown and people were told to work at home if they could. And among those who said that they missed their commute to work were those who were walking and cycling, not those who were driving. So I think it shows that there's a great opportunity that we can take advantage of in the positive experience in cycling, and we can use that in sort of accelerating the shift to a more bike-friendly, walk-friendly city. It is also accompanied by the city to support repairs, to support enterprises that want to have some kind of pop-up fix your bike, electric bike support for disadvantaged parts of the city. So there's a lot happening.
A lot that has happened and a lot that must be harnessed, that is not just temporary but hopefully permanent, isn't it? Gregor, what can we learn?
Well, I think I would totally agree. There's been great progress with walking and biking. I mean, the numbers are up dramatically. People, use active transportation around more. So that's fantastic. It's gotten a lot more people into it, and the technology, electric bikes are enabling even more people to get into it. So now I think cities are going to have to work a lot harder to create that infrastructure and make sure there's very safe and convenient bike networks in our cities to support that. I think the bigger piece is around working from home, and largely the success of that. I don't think we could have shifted that many people out of commuting and working from home any other way. It's like a silver lining to otherwise a very tragic pandemic. But it has enabled a lot more exploration and success with work from home and reducing that commuting requirements. It hasn't been perfect, and I think, but we've learned a lot. And on the business side, I think a lot of people figured out we can do this, we can survive with this. People can work from home more, have more flexible hours, and there are limits to that too. I think we also need to get together to be successful as well. So I think it's been a lot of learning, and I think there'll be a big climate benefit to that for the long term, based on those learnings. So that's a positive anyway.
That you brought the notion of working from home and also the in-home services we are having right now. Because in the audience who's asking, like, will our cities ever see a rush hour again? So you're somehow speaking, I think, to that comment made from the participants. Maya, tell me, what do you think? What have you seen actually Helsinki learn through these pandemic moments that you would like to harness and make it permanent for the future?
I'd like to start by saying that we are lucky enough, as are the people from Oslo, that we are also small enough that compared to some other cities, you can even say that we have never even witnessed a rush hour. But what I think are the main lessons learned from the COVID is firstly that actually the pandemic, maybe it revealed more than it changed. And what I mean with this is that it revealed the strengths and weaknesses of different cities, countries, places, and organizations. And that is maybe the most important lesson learned. That cities which were functional, reliable, resilient, they have been managing the situation much better than some other ones. But still, and then maybe the second lesson learned was that societies, cities which are based on trust, they managed the pandemic, at least so far, better than other ones. And I think, for example, in Helsinki, the main reason why we have succeeded the pandemic as well as we have, and we have that low numbers of cases here, is that people have really they trust authorities. If we come with some rules or um, proposals or suggestions, that they really follow them. The third lesson learned is that, however, people may change their behavior quite rapidly, and that is something which has taken place all around the world. As we heard already from both Oslo and Vancouver, we see some positive changes, that people move to walking and cycling, which is not only climate friendly but also good for the health and some other benefits as well. But we have also seen that people move from public transport to cars, private cars, and that is of course not that positive phenomenon. And there, I believe that and I hope that whenever the pandemic is over, that those places, cities which are really based on trust, have a better chance to convince their people to come back to use the public transport in the future than other places.
Excellent point, and thank you very much, Mayor. We are indeed encouraging a danger of stigmatizing public transport. In a previous panel this afternoon, we heard that we shouldn't allow public transport to be touched by a disease or to collapse because of a disease, as much as it sits at the center of an equitable and low carbon mobility system almost anywhere. Thank you so very much for reminding us that. There is a question addressed to Gregor, and it's about that notion of the 15-minute city, that notion of proximity. They would like to know a bit more about it. They find that is a very interesting concept. What can you tell us about it, Greg? 15-minute city.
Well, I mean, I think Mayor Jan opened up with that and the importance of planning a city. I mean, so that transportation is can be active, can be walking and biking. It's really a planning discipline and making sure that as we approve projects that we build, that we make sure people can live close to where they work and within a short distance. So I think that planning has been successfully implemented in some cities. I think it's more difficult in cities in the global south and in cities that are urbanizing very quickly, that are dealing with informal settlements, that are dealing with big car infrastructure being built, um, and suburbs sprawling far across the geography. So, it really depends on the city. I think the kind of best practices in planning now and are linking transportation and land use and making sure that make it very easy and convenient for people to live and work and play. That, and having good transportation links for all of that. Being able to link with public transport and rapid transit, being able to link those high growth areas and concentrate the growth into those hubs. So I think that is generally the best practice now in planning, but it doesn't get applied everywhere. It's more difficult, and I think in a lot of cities there still is way too much influence from the forces that support sprawl and growth and development that doesn't make sense for climate. there's still a lot of power in those forces that we have to reckon with.
Excellent. Well, we are entering in the very last minutes, and we have two questions that just come up, and I wouldn't like to leave them unaddressed. So I'm going to use the prerogative of the moderator to assign each of these questions to one of you, and then ask you for a bit of a final thoughts on public and private partnerships. But first, these two questions. There is one that says, sustainable communities need a focus on walking, cycling, scooting, then community transport before the car use and the infrastructure. Can Karine suggest how councils can support this transition away from the personal car use? That is for you, Karine. If you can help me like in 1 minute, that would be phenomenal.
How can city councils help people move away from private cars to walking, cycling, public transport? One, they have to have a city planning that really drives this shift, which would mean to have a spatial planning that uses roads, parking spaces, all of that. I would put a premium on cars and instead put that premium on the other ways of transportation, to have a planning that really thinks through how can you have a livable city or part of the city where distances are so short that you can reach the places that you need to go to with walking or cycling. And of course, you have to invest in public transport. You have to sort of consider public transport as a necessary part of infrastructure to make the city function. It cannot be just some luxury. And just to say that, really share Jan's concern about the consequences of COVID in that regard. And then I think you have to show all the benefits of this.
Well, there is a question that is linking buildings, energy, transport, and I think I'm going to address it to the mayor because of the energy challenge we had and your disclosure of that tough decision you had to take around buildings. And the question says, how have you dealt with building energy retrofits? They're actually alluding to the difficulty of meeting targets in Canada without type of retrofits. So, Mayor, please tell us a bit about the experience in Helsinki. If there's anything that you think can connect building energy retrofits, transport infrastructure.
Retrofits is certainly the most challenging part of the equation. I mean, because you can tackle new buildings by regulation, but tackling retrofits by regulation, it's much more difficult, and it's also more difficult to convince the owners of different kind of buildings to make retrofits, which really at the same time increase the energy efficiency. And there I think that we come up with the challenge that there are some people who believe in regulation, some who believe in technology, and some who believe in awareness raising, and it's always a combination of all of those. And then the public sector and the city needs to think that where do you have the best cost benefit for different kind of subsidies, and we in Helsinki believe that it is here that to subsidize also private owners of buildings if they make energy retrofits which are like sustainable or progressive enough.
Excellent, thank you very much. So now, last question to all of you. We know that we need radical collaboration, isn't it, between different stakeholders. Let's put, the world into two teams: the public sector team and the private sector team. How do we work better together for transforming the mobility of our cities in the present and for the future? Let me start in the order we heard you first. So, Mayor, please go first, then followed by Gregor, and last but not least by Karine. This is really your concluding statement. So, public-private partnerships for the mobility of the future in cities. How?
I think that one of the biggest strengths of a city like Helsinki, and this goes also for Oslo, is that we are at the same time big enough to be called as a city and having all the features of a city, but at the same time also small enough to enable really demonstrations and pilots on systemic scale. And this is a background story what took place a year ago when I was the first man on earth who received a lunch delivered by a drone in an urban environment. And I think that was an excellent example of a public-private partnership where the city actually created the platform and enabled a pilot and demonstration on a systemic scale. And then it was actually an American alphabet company wing, which stood for the technology.
Excellent,
So I believe
excellent.
that the role of a city is very much also to act as a platform, as a enabler, as a partner, and then give the private sector best possible opportunities and the best environment for innovations and also demonstrating and piloting them.
Enabling environments, isn't it? Gregor, public-private partnerships for the future of mobility in cities. How?
Yeah,
And in one minute,
absolutely
please.
agree. 1 minute. I absolutely agree with Marianne that it is about enabling and making sure you create the regulatory environment for entrepreneurs to be successful and for the market to deliver good solutions. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in transportation. We're seeing new technologies coming, climate-friendly, zero-emission vehicles, bicycles, you name it, which is fantastic. The cities and governments have to keep up with the infrastructure and enabling that. And I think it is more difficult, again, as the mayor said, with buildings and retrofit. We don't have good market solutions. But we need the entrepreneurs and industry to step up more on building. They're way behind. I think on transportation, there's good partnership, good technology being developed, and it looks much more promising right now, which is that's encouraging.
Excellent. Karine, public-private partnerships for the mobility of the future. How?
It's a great topic, and just also like to echo what the mayor said about cities that can be big enough to drive some real change and small enough to be innovative and go in front. We can do more. We can test things that the national government aren't really able to step up on. And one example from Oslo is sort of related to transportation. It's about construction work. So construction work is a big source of emissions in Oslo. And about 5 years ago, one of the main building entities decided they wanted to have fossil-free construction. They actually wanted emission-free construction. And it turned out that electrical diggers, electrical excavators are not something just off the shelf. So we started working with industry to get those solutions out there. We also teamed up with a number of other cities, the bank network and the C40, to really drive the market for these solutions. And when we opened the world's first zero-emission construction site in Oslo last year, that was thanks to a very good and close cooperation with industry who really wanted to be forward on this, be pioneers as well. And so through that experience, we've got into contacts in other parts of the industry, with the same for other parts of the mobility sector as well.
Okay, well, thank you so very much to the three of you. It's been a phenomenal wealth, richness of hands-on experience from different geographies and different locations. Much appreciated. So, Nick, we have heard that the pandemic has not actually changed a lot in terms of the challenges we had, but just revealed them. We have heard that importance of conceiving and understanding the cities beyond their administrative boundaries, supporting the capacity of local governments to actually change mobility, the importance of national framework, that notion of enabling environments that local governments and national can put in place for good public-private collaboration and bringing people along, harnessing the behavioral change we have seen in terms of mobility modes, while at the same time paying attention to the risk of stigmatizing public transport because of a disease. Back to you in the studio. A big, big hand to the three of you. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.
Marusha, thank you very much indeed. A tremendous panel there. I'm intrigued by the 15-minute city, if I understand this correctly. But I ask myself as a geographer, actually, can a large urban settlement be defined as a city if the maximum time anything takes is 15 minutes? It seems almost counterintuitive. And if I heard you right, a lunch being delivered by drone What happens when the drones collide? A shower of chop suey or miso soup? Doesn't bear thinking about, but thank you. Tremendous panels there, hosted by Marusha in Brussels. So that's it for the moment. We'd like to say thank you for joining us for the third day of the Sustainable Innovation Forum. And thanks very much to the BMW Group, who are our headline partners, plus Mighty and also Oliver Wyman, the risk management consultants. And our partner, and that's where Marusha comes from the Slowcat partnership, and for Marusha's moderating as well. What's coming up tomorrow? Well, join us again at 1:30 GMT, that's 2:30 Central European time, but it's not confined to all of you in Europe. There are plenty we know who are joining from Asia and also from the Americas, so you can work out your times from that, 1:30 p.m. Central European time. The fourth day is about the industrial transition, how that's emerging, how that's being defined. How can we accelerate breakthroughs for our hardest to abate sectors? Well, joining us tomorrow, we'll have the International Energy Agency's Executive Director, Fatih Birol. He'll be joining us, as well as the Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden, Isabella Lövin, who's leading the UN Industrial Transition Group. We'll have opening remarks from the United Nations Industrial Development Organization Director General Lee Yong. Finally, we'll be joined by the UK's Minister for Energy, Kwasi Kwarteng. He'll be talking about the technological solutions for industrial decarbonisation, alongside industry leaders from steel and hydrogen, including the latest prospects for CCUS. All this at a time when today, at this moment, the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has been meeting industry leaders to promote his new 10-point greening of the British system. A lot of detail needed, but we'll hear directly from one of his ministers, his energy minister, Kwasi Kwarteng. So that's all tomorrow. For the fourth of our 5 days, we'll have 3 hours of work for you and 3 hours of very high octane, rich material. It'll all be, of course, carbon free. Join us again at 1:30 GMT tomorrow. From me, Nick Gowing, bye-bye.